Hi there, and welcome on the journey to transform culture. I'm Steve, and I'll be your guide. Well, folks, I hope you're having a fantastic day and an even better week. Well, folks, in this video, I hate to break it to you, you've been running a social script. Steve, what do you mean by this? Folks, you've been running a social script your entire life. If you go back to the earliest memory, and now this relative to the culture you grew up in, right? Your race, ethnicity, your whether you were poor or wealthy or somewhere in the middle, pick a category, okay? That somewhat points at where you came from to begin with, right? You entered this lovely realm and you were given a social script. Now, there were some probably in your life, more in your life, who were trying to tell you who you were, this is who we are, and this is what we're about, and this is the obligations you have to live up to. Now, they didn't tell you this when we're two, right? You picked up on this by hearing similar, it's said in very masked ways to cousins and maybe siblings, older siblings, other, say, aunts or uncles or, adults, basically, right? You were picking up on all of this by your surroundings, okay? It's the nature part of the whole nature nurture, right? Well, I guess technically the nurture part. But you were picking up on this right out of the gate. And this script, right, this social script started to plant seeds within you, right? So you begin to value what? Maybe, and I'm just going to use some real easy, low-hanging fruit just to make this simple. But if you came from a family that valued education, then there was a leaning toward the importance of education. If there was a leaning less so about education and more about, well, hard work is what defines who we are, and we're all about hard work, which who could dispute that, right? It's not an argument. It isn't to say that you want that that's a bad thing. That's the other thing about this social script. There's subtleties built within it, right? So if I say, hard work, it defines who we are, right? All the things. Of course, there's a truth to that, right? But it isn't the entire truth, right? It isn't the main truth, right? But it is definitely a supporting truth. But then what happens? If we take and extrapolate forward, well, hard work. Well, so-and-so values hard work. When I'm around them, I need to work hard. Or so-and-so values education. I need to get up to speed. In subtle ways, you started to work to what? To be validated by others, not because of some overt desire, but this, subconscious desire to want to be accepted, right? When we're young, we want to be accepted into the world, right? Nobody wants to be, wants the reverse. Nobody wants to be rejected or exiled, especially when we're young, right? When we're young, highly impressionable. This is where the whole impressionability comes from with youth, okay? Is that they're highly impressionable. So if I tell you, you are, congratulations, you've been born into one of the 3 smartest families on planet Earth, right? Now, you could have fun with that, of course, but if somebody was seriously telling you that and then backing that up with, some real, some really interesting fiction and demonstrating this is why, and you were like, wow, okay, wow, well, even if egoically you didn't feel like you were better than others because you were amongst the smartest and so on, you may have felt now an obligation to use that intelligence, right, to help others, hopefully, right? Hopefully it's the light side, right? But it could also be over time that also became the beginning of infusing manipulation into the conversation, into that social script. So, obviously I'm just pulling some random scenarios out of a hat, right? Obviously, we can go on and on pulling scenarios about how you grew up. If you grew up on the streets, right? There's a there is a survival element to how you were raised and what you could and couldn't do and who you could trust, who you couldn't trust, to be wary of, to form bonds to survive, right? So you've got all kinds of amalgamations, right, of the script, the social script that you were given right out of the gate. Now, some of this, sure, a reaction to environment, and much of it, what? Passed down, right? This is how what our parents said to do. This was kind of the facts, right? Um, and you can see society too, right? There's a certain structure that requires you to follow your script. And if you break out of your script, then what do you see? You break out of your social script. Now I'll use the example of the Truman Show. Okay? You break out of your social script, like Truman. He started to take note. First, he was observing, right? He was observing what was going on, right? Why did this light fall randomly in the middle of the street? Crazy. Who are you talking to? As the wife is marketing some product in the kitchen to no one, basically, in his feeling, right? But there's cameras everywhere. But hopefully it didn't spoil the Truman Show. Anyway, hopefully if you haven't seen it, go watch it. Definitely watch it. But what's the first thing? It's observation. Observation, then clues. Now, all cultures, sorry folks, all of it, okay? We are all living in this Truman Show, okay? Now, do we know who's passing the script out and who's lighting the stage and all these things? No, we don't really know that part, right? And it isn't to say that you have to be paranoid that somebody's trying to steer your life into chaos or into nothingness. If anything, part of this social scripting was designed, what? To make you productive enough, and being productive, again, not poo-pooing productivity, but to make you productive in ways, right, that would make you what? Work for agendas that weren't your own, okay? So if it's, you convince your neighbor XYZ, if you pick up, all the leaves, then this will help both of us because, and you come up with some real roundabout reason why your neighbor should do your work for you, right? Manipulated, right? There's a manipulation. If your neighbor's right buying into that, it's bought into the script, right? Now, obviously, this is really far out. I give you that, okay? But if you could imagine that being the case, right? This is funny. I was in Japan, stationed in Japan, and base housing. My buddy lived in some base housing, and it wasn't fenced. The yards weren't in the backyard. Nothing was fenced, and there was like a park kind of in the back, and of course neighbors and the whole bit, right? Well, and he had had a newborn, so he didn't have kids that were toddler age or older kids, and my kids were just older toddlers, if you will, ish, and there was this, I don't know, neighbor kid. He was probably about 6 or 7, or I don't know. I think he was 6, something like that. And and yes, he was kind of a prank. But he says, "Hey, so and so, yeah, because I think he was somewhere in the backyard. He was in the backyard or something." And he goes, "Yeah, there's a bunch of dinosaur bones out in the back. It was old, dried up dog poop is what it was." And he goes, "Yeah, old dinosaur bones," right? And I just thought, "Oh, dude, what are you doing?" Right? This, poor kid telling him that. But this is the thing, right? He was proposing a script, right? This was the nature of the script, and we have been told that and I'm not. This does not do with dinosaurs, but our version of the dinosaur bones, right? Oh, if you do this, oh wow, there's real value there. That's valuable, right? Oh, this is valuable. Oh, that's valuable. We're always pointed toward what's valuable. But what's really valuable is if you believe it's valuable, you're helping somebody else generate value, right? so, so this is why the script, okay? And it's a social script. So many people's lives have been hung on, been put on this hanger of a social script. You may have been told, you may come from a family of doctors, and I'm just using all the top, few just for obvious, we all know them. Doctor, lawyer, engineer, etc. All the higher profile professions say that are usually pretty successful. Okay, well, you needed to be this. We were this. You need to be that. Right? It's a social script. Right? Why do you need to be that? Well, there's an ego and pride. So that's the other thing. The ego and pride is used. I don't mean against you. It's not like you're going to be bad off because you can be a doctor, a lawyer, or whatever. But it was used against you in a certain sense to fulfill somebody else, to stroke somebody else's ego, really is what it comes down to. I can have pride in you because you became somebody successful, right? Well, what is success? What if you're a starving artist, but you enjoy what you do and you light up people's lives with your actual artwork, or maybe it's music, or et cetera, right? Because art isn't usually high paying unless you're, by the masses, right? And because it is so subjective, right, to all of our tastes and so forth. But anyway, so this whole script, right? You may have lived up to that following a social script. Now, I'll give you an example of where at a very young age, I don't know, I probably picked up on this by the time I was 5 or 6 myself, right? No dinosaur bones in this story. But so my parents divorced when I was 2. And so I would go, go to school, as I got a little bit older, obviously, go to kindergarten, first grade, whatever. And until about the time I was 5 or 6, I guess, somewhere in there, to where this became probably more apparent. But I would stay at one set of grandparents, right, after school until my mom got off work. Okay, she worked at a title company. And then she would come and pick me up. And then my other grandparents at the time, this wasn't their entire, profession, but at that time they happened to be owners of an A&W, okay, restaurant. Now it's fast food. Then it was, it was fast, I guess, relative to then, but it was actually amazing food, but homemade too. Oh, it was so good. Not so much that processed junk. Anyway, on the way home from my grandparents, and let me set up the stage. The grandparents that I stayed at after school, they were poorer. They were farmers. They had an orchard and worked a farm and all that stuff, right? Had garden and whatever. My grandmother canned, that on that side, canned. And they had honeysuckle bushes, and they had radishes and a tree with, plums and all of the things. And as a little kid, I would run around and I was like in the Jungle Book. I was literally like Mowgli in the Jungle Book. I could just pull something either out of the ground or off a tree, or those honeysuckle things. And there was always something, I was never hungry. Okay. But my grandmother, by this time, all but maybe one of my aunts and uncles, my grandmother on that side had 10 children. Okay. So I had essentially 9 aunts and uncles. Okay. And the youngest one was about 10 years older than me, an aunt that was still in the house at the time. Anyway, and living with them. The rest were all grown up and out on their own. But my grandfather, and I didn't realize this as a really small child until I got a little bit older. Obviously, I was probably in the 6 range. I started to piece together drinking, right? Drinking about of beer, right? Which, you see it as a kid, you just don't think nothing of it. And then if uncles come around, whatever, there's some beers, whatever. And it's just part of the culture. Again, part of the script, right? It's in your environment, right? Well, what I wouldn't figure out till later than this, right? I'm telling you what I observed, right? What I wouldn't figure out till later is that, and maybe it's because my grandfather had 10 kids, but he drank too much. But he drank too much at night, and I was never there at night. I was only at home, or maybe we were visiting my other grandparents, etc. at night. I was only there during the day, so I saw what? Just normalcy during the day. So what is the mix here? Why am I telling you this? Right? But what is the mix here? Hardworking people, right? Smart, but not, not necessarily brilliant. My dad, well, I'll come back to that in a second. But also what? Codependent or addictive, have a bit of addictive personality, or what? Things to distract us from what? From his script. Whatever his script was, it may not have been to deal with all the stresses that come from such, large family. I mean, obviously, it may not have been that ultimately, but I'm just giving you an example of some of these, derived things. My dad drank some when he was younger, but as I got, as I would get older, my dad, I don't think I ever saw my dad drink. My dad went to school, got his degree. He joined the Navy first, and then he ended up going to college and all the things, right? And he probably had enough credits to become a PhD. But anyway, he was a brilliant guy. But he broke that paradigm. He broke the script, right? And then what you also notice when you're young, when I observe it, me being a kid, is that my dad was held in a certain way, right? That he could break the script of what the others were doing or not doing, but there was also a cost to that breaking of that social script. And the cost was what? Kind of looked at him a little side-eyed, right? Now my dad, he was probably about 6'2". Yeah, I mean, he was also in the forestry in the U.S. Forest Service, so he was very capable. Okay, but brilliant. Okay, so you have that mix, but he broke from his script. He broke from the script, and he went on to do his thing. Right. Well, back to my part. I would leave thinking, oh, okay, that's all normal. And then I would go back over here to the other side. I would see them. I'd go on the way home as a real little kid. I'd get like a ice cream cone or a burger or whatever, and they would, okay. And then the farmers, they were, politically left leaning, but, marginally so, not extremists or anything like that. Go to the other grandparents, and all of that, they were conservative, but not extremists either. Actually, both grandparents got along. My one grandparent would give boxes of peaches because he, obviously, all the orchards and all the stuff. He would give my other grandparents. He'd come into their hardware store, was another place that they also had worked before, and he would bring boxes of peaches to them. Right, both very ingratiating toward one another. There wasn't a hate or a vitriol. Okay. People have their own belief systems and their own paradigms, right? Why? Because they were all given their social script at a particular stage in life. Now, looking to the conservative side of the family, what I wouldn't figure out until much later, not 6 or 7, because I wasn't that socially aware as a kid, right? And this was in Northern California too. And during the late 60s, the move was on to kind of, a lot of paradigms were being broken. Let's put it that way. A lot of people were breaking the script, breaking out of the script they were given. But anyway, what I would find out later, because I kind of tended to idolize some of them a little bit, a little bit more. But what I noticed later was there had been levels of racism, within the depths of the history of the family. Okay. And I don't mean like that I'm aware of anything extreme, but it was that sense. But I wasn't raised that way. Here I was in the middle. Hey, respect everyone. Da 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 da. what I didn't realize is that I was breaking the script from a very young age. So I didn't feel the need to attach my wagon to a paradigm. Why is that? Because typically when things become so, if you have to follow somebody else's script for you, that's a problem. That's a red flag. Doesn't matter which side of the aisle. I'm using politics now, right? The social aspects. If somebody's requiring you to hitch your wagon to their XYZ to be accepted, that to me is a red flag. Why? Because you're not building a bridge. You're not improving anything. All you're doing is dividing things more, right? So this is where things become difficult for folks. Why is that? Because you're given this script early in life. Now imagine had I been, and I count myself blessed, but had I been immersed in either or, I would probably have accepted certain aspects of the social script that wouldn't have been beneficial, right? Negatively. I saw the value in the positive, right? But I also could see where it was hamstrung, where the weaknesses were, where the flaws in the argument lay. And because of that, doesn't mean I hated either of them. No, contrary. I love them, right? Loved them. They're all past now. But this goes on with all of us, folks. Some of us have had the, I will say the advantage of not being caught up by the immersive social scripts. Others, not so much. And so what happens is over time, as people live in observations, folks, as you see people what? Gravitated, like I noticed uncles on this side, gravitated more to addictive things, alcohol primarily, addictive things, right? That didn't help them or their relationships and all of these things, right? And over here, it became its own version of being self-destructive, but not in the same way. It was just different, right? So you have to, you have to observe things where they're at, but there's a certain implosion that happens when anybody is given a script, a social script to follow. And then when you follow that, you've hitched your wagon. And now what if the horse that you hitched your wagon to runs over a cliff, folks? Runs over a cliff. Now you're in trouble, or is about to. Let's say it's about to run over a cliff. Now there's something inside of you that will go up, okay? And it will notice when those horses are pulling you toward that, when you're getting ever closer to that cliff. And then you're starting to observe really fast that something is wrong, right? This is Neo in the Matrix, okay? If I'm Morpheus now talking to you and you're Neo, do you notice this, and that? Do you notice these things? Are you noticing the script? Do you notice the mask you were handed as a young person or a little bit older, right? Now, add to the fact that you're reinforced with any success. So with success, you reinforce your identity now is interlaced with what? With that social script you were given, okay? And now it's reinforced. So anything that threatens that social script, now what? Threatens your identity. Threatens your identity, which makes it very difficult for anybody to really slow down and observe, right? That these horses are pulling you over the cliff. So what happens? You lean into whatever crutch that is, whatever codependence or addiction, etc. Okay? Maybe you get into a relationship that's torturous, right? And by torturous, you're overgiving and all of these sorts of things, right? Or manipulated and all those things. Maybe it's an addictive thing where it's substances and those sorts of deals, right? Maybe it's a combination and all many facets in between, right? Using extremes to just delineate here. But as you've gone, right, you've reinforced the script, right? And you may have, if you're as old as I am and your kids are, grown, there is a portion of this script that we've parlayed onto say our kids or grandkids, depending how old they are, right? How old your family is. We have potentially passed on the social script, right? One thing that's the only thing my dad said is if you join the military, go in the Air Force because they have the best food. There was other advantages I felt, but but that was, this is from a brilliant guy. It just all kind of comes back to your stomach, right? Whatever. But that was pretty much it. He never said, "Hey, study this, study that." Da, 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 da. He was very creative, very open to different things, for life. But there are those, and I've seen parents do this with their now grown children, at certain stages where they say, "Oh, you have to get your degree," blah 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 blah. Well, they run off and get their degree, and it doesn't have anything to do with anything they pursue, or the people are, the people going to school were unhappy, right? Others, well, just work hard. Education, that's for arrogant people, whatever, So there is that script, right? And these masks, here's your mask. And this mask doesn't allow you to be, to go educate yourself, right? So we've all dealt with some of this, and this isn't all 100% like you don't have an awareness of this. You do. The thing that is interesting is that at what point, how bad does it have to get, right, as a society, before we start to question the script we've been handed? How far? How many things have to go wrong in a row before we do something different that we didn't do, hadn't done to this point, right? Now, that said, different means better, okay? To unite, not to divide, okay? To solve, not to, to create more problems. We've already seen where the social script has also come with other scripts, right? Other scripts where now maybe it's your profession and the products and service you produce now also what? Hurt others. They're unsafe, right? You're doing food additives that are actually toxic or poison, et cetera, medicines, blah, 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 blah. There's so many elements to this, right? Where mistakes can be made and many people can be hurt, right? Now, professionally, you've been handed a script. Your ego's been reinforced by your success with a particular company or in a particular field. But this particular company or field is now doing something to hurt other people. What do you do? Right? How many people have to be hurt? How many things have to go wrong before you change your approach? Remove the mask and decide not to follow that script, right? To do the better, right, just thing. This is a question we all, an awakening, folks, isn't just about, well, I'm enlightened to my consciousness and who I am and my hopes and dreams. That's part of it. When you realize that script is pulling away from who you are and what you want to do and the pursuits, right? You wanted to be an artist, but somebody else wanted you to be a scientist and vice versa, right? Whatever, it's juxtaposed. It may be not completely juxtaposed. It may be just off by some, but it's different. And you're not in alignment, right? You know what the lack of alignment is? I'll let you look it up. Maybe you get on AI or look it up, just Google it. What is the definition of being out of alignment, right? When you are following a script, other script, and when that's reinforcing your ego and you're wearing a mask to hold all this together, right? You are out of your own alignment. And when you're out of your own alignment, look up what that definition of that is. And that'll wake you up or begin to start to make you think a little bit. Because you're not going to get the most and have the maximize the thriving of your life, right? If you're out of alignment, you're just not going to get there. And you're not going to get there if what? If you are buying into a script, right, that isn't healthy for you and those you care about. It's just not going to be. Now, in my pre-video, I wanted to present this to you as well as a question back to myself. Okay, Steve, Playing you for a second. Okay, Steve, you talk about systems, you're systems architect, help processes and procedures, and help people, all the things. Aren't you helping to hold the script in place? Aren't you there? Isn't what you're doing keeping that script in place and perpetuating that script? Because this is what we have to do, folks. We have to hold up that mirror, right, to our very selves and ask the tough questions. We can't let ourselves off the hook. We can't let a faith, right? We can't let a faith or a politics or any other social element, right, tell us what and who we are. They may give us some guidance about, hey, this is a map to here and this is a map to there, right? But it's up to us to be able to figure it out, right? We each have to follow it. The moment somebody else tells us X, Y, and Z, and you must, now you're following a social script, okay? So be aware of that. Now, to answer the question, Steve, are you propping up and perpetuating, right, the social script? And I'll answer you with this. You would be correct, I guess, fictitious person out there. You would be correct if I was doing it for the betterment of the few. My system is specifically designed for the benefit of all. Hear that again. And I believe this is the litmus test, is if you're creating anything, right? You're building a ladder, right? Hey, build me that ladder because, and then after you build me that ladder, climb up that ladder and pick that fruit. And then after you pick that fruit, give me that fruit so I can sell it and I'll give you a penny and I'll make, $5, whatever, right? We'll just say that there's an imbalance, obviously, right? If you're doing it to raise only a few boats, not to lift all boats, then yes, you'd be correct. If you design a system, it should perpetuate growth for all. And if it doesn't perpetuate growth for all, don't do it. Don't change. Keep screwing it up the way you're screwing it up now. Because why? People will walk away from your organization or your system or whatever. They'll walk away from it because it's spiraling down now, right? I'm really giving a heads up to those people who have developed systems and have forced people's noses into the dog poo of the situation of social engineering, okay? The social script. It is already spiraling down, but are you waking up? Are you going to wake up before that, the horses, those particular horses drag you off the cliff with them, okay? Okay, we'll say these are not happy horses, okay? These are evil horses, okay? Love horses, by the way. But when are you going to unhitch your wagon? When are you going to go, oh, crap? Now, this is where it's also a challenge because with any kind of awakening, there is, it's not going to be easy, folks. If this was going to be easy, somebody else would be telling you. That's why I'm telling you. Okay, this is not going to be easy. People who have benefited from you playing out your social script, could be family, could be friends, could be community, could be your politics, could be your faith, could be this, could be that, right? They are going to reject you, right? They're going to be like, the townspeople wanting to burn down Frankenstein's castle, right? It'll be like that in the minutest to the grandiose versions, okay? When you decide to step away from the script that others have laid at your feet and expected you to follow, okay? Now, keep in mind, folks, even those, right? I would like to say that I have been caught up in the script. Look, folks, and let me clarify from my earlier story. It's not like, from age 6, I've been perfectly avoiding scripts. No, I've been failing forward in going into these paradigms only to realize, oh my gosh, right? And unhitching my wagon before they drug me over the side, okay? and then realizing and looking around and saying, oh my gosh, people aren't getting this. People aren't seeing this. They're not. And then look, you can use the data to back it up, folks. When you're talking about I believe it's 6.6 or right in that neighborhood, trillion in waste. This is unforced errors in organizations across the U.S. $6.6 trillion, folks. 6.6. Take half of that, put that back into, the people's hands. What? Well, now they can survive. Now they can thrive. Now they can build. Now they can X, they can Y, and they can Z, right? It's the data. This is backed by data, folks. The data is out there. The spiral is going over, it's headed over the cliff, folks. And businesses and systems are going to fail, but they're not going to fail quietly, okay? So you've got an option. You fail with them, or you let them fail on their own, right? And then you do your own thing. You break from the script. You might start your own business. You might align, back to alignment, don't forget your assignment, back to align. You align with our organizations that are what? Who aren't, going down the nefarious trails, right? And thereby consolidating, right? We're consolidating effort toward what? Things that are healthy, things that are good for people, not things that are bad for people, unhealthy or destructive, right? And you do that, and then you're going to let the worthless, the nefarious, and the unhealthy, and the derisive fall away. Okay, it'll burn itself out. Okay, it'll burn itself off. You're going to let that, chaff will burn itself off away from the wheat. But you don't want the wheat to get, burned up with chaff. Okay, and so part of this is Morpheus, kind of like Morpheus in the movie Matrix, right? Trying to wake up Neo. I'm not telling you the red pill or the blue pill. I'm just telling you the truth, folks. It's up to you. You decide. And on that note, remember to hit that good green domino 3 to 5 times a day to uplift, motivate, inspire, and just encourage one another. When we do this, not only are we helping to transform culture, but we're transforming our own lives. But don't forget, we can't transform anything on the outside if we're not genuinely honest and have a desire to transform on the inside first. This is so important. All right, folks, have a fantastic day. Hit like, share, and subscribe. And until next time, we'll talk to you later.